We have two guests in the studio today. We are looking at the verdict of the Supreme Court and looking at how our elections then will be conducted into the future based on what the judges were saying yesterday. Senior Counsel ABDIKADIR MOHAMED is here with us in the studio. He was a member of the 10th Parliament. He was the chair of the Parliamentary Select Committee on Constitution Review. And then after the Constitution was promulgated, he chaired the Constitution Implementation Oversight Committee. That is what oversaw the implementation of the Constitution at that initial stage. Kamodho Waiganjo was a commissioner with the Commission for the Implementation of the Constitution after the Constitution was promulgated. He's an advocate, a constitutional lawyer. Both gentlemen are here with us. There are very many reforms that have taken place in our election system, starting with the Kriegler Commission and the recommendations and some of the implementations of the Kriegler report, then going into the laws, and then going into what has been taken to court, like what is being hailed now, the minor KI decision of the Court of Appeal in 2017 and the Supreme Court decisions previously, and even now what the Supreme Court has been saying. We have been seeing a lot of reforms in our electoral system. We in this studio have argued many times with our frustration that the reforms that we are seeing are not coming so far from Parliament, but from the judiciary. It's courts that are actually enforcing reforms in our system when some of those things need to be implemented in Parliament. Like in 2017, some of the things that ought to have been implemented in legal reforms, IEBC approaches Parliament, Parliament goes on recess between 2017 and 2022 in a matter, and then they just come into the final months of 2021, 2022 to have a new IEBC Elections Act being amended, to have the Political Parties Act being amended. Anyway, that's a frustration. But before we went to the news, City had a question which was with regards to exactly how the petitions are conducted in Parliament.
I liked what Senior Counsel mentioned with regards to this adversarial position that the Commonwealth processes, should we say, include in how they determine to adjudicate matters. But in this case, if I'm not wrong, our justices did get involved. They didn't just listen. You know, if it was one question, you'd say a question, but they got involved. They were asking questions and they were participating in it. So could one then argue that we have a hybrid system?
Let me say something. We don't. We are still an adversarial system, and it has its weaknesses, which are evident sometimes in cases. You can lose a case because you have a bad lawyer. You know, it doesn't mean that you have a bad case. That's one of the challenges of an adversarial system. You can lose a case because you didn't produce the evidence, you know, or your evidence, you are not able to present it in a way that was convincing to the court, and because the court then is not a player. You know, the court says, you present your case, let the other person challenge it, and we'll make an objective decision. And that is generally the route we follow. There were certain tweaks in the process, even though the court retained an adversarial system. And I think the one that was most obvious is obviously the questions that the judges asked. But that is common. I think the questions here are a lot more incisive. And the courts did not get into an argument with the parties, if you notice. You presented your answer and the court left you. They just sought clarification. In fact, they were very clear that they were not questioning the credibility of what you're saying, but they just needed you to clarify. So there's a bit of the inquisition. The other system is called the inquisitorial system. But there was also one other aspect, which is the what is it called, the scrutiny process, where the court itself now became a player in the process. Their officers are the ones who oversaw the scrutiny of the ballots, and they came and gave a report to the court. It was not just the parties coming and presenting their view. It was that there's a report by the court, which the court is going to follow, but which can be challenged by the parties. Also on the digital question, which we talked about earlier, the court again depended, and if you listen to the court yesterday through the CJ, the court depended on the report from the registrar. So the court, in that small respect, acted as sort of a player. But generally, the case is adversarial. Everyone presents their case, and it is on the strength of the case that
as dramatically and sensationally as they could. But I think what the court said in its decision is that even then, as counsel,
you must ensure that the case you present is a case that is not based on falsehoods, especially falsehoods that are obvious. You see, there may be things you may not know, but especially when you're not producing a client. You see, a person can come and give false evidence, and there's nothing you can do as counsel.
Yeah.
But if you're the mouthpiece of your client, you're the one as a lawyer who's swearing an affidavit, ensure that that affidavit is credible. Ensure that to the extent that it is humanly possible, that you yourself have established that what you are saying is right, to the extent that you can. So that in fact, the court went short of saying there was perjury, went short of saying there is professional misconduct, It just went short of there. But I think for me, what is important in talking about future reforms is that the next petition we see in the Supreme Court, and I hope even in the other courts, should be based on evidence that is credible, as opposed to suppositions and rumor and conspiracy. It needs to be based on evidence that is credible, and I think that for me is a good development. Talking about developments for the future,
we were talking about this earlier when the judges said the institution of IEBC needs reforms. We also need reforms. I think even in the manner of them rebuking the lawyers, they are basically also saying we need to also look at the rules of engagement when you come before court. If we look at the entire process, the other issue is the judges themselves have previously sat here. 4 of the 7 Supreme Court judges have sat here, and each of them has said 14 days, not enough. 14 days, not enough for us to deal with a petition of such magnitude. Maybe this is also another conversation that going forward, okay, how much more time do we need to determine an election petition dispute, presidential dispute?
So I think that that worked well personally when we were proposing it, when we were doing the Katiba. The question was, in all other election cases, the election petition happens when the office holder is already in office.
Yes.
And it can take a year or 6 months, or under the old constitution, it used to take 5 years sometimes.
No more. I think there's a petition by an MP that's still there from 2013. No, from 2007.
There you go. Yeah. So here the problem was that look, you have a president who is sitting. The dynamics are such that you might get a situation where, during Moi's time, you remember there was a problem how to serve the president, and the Court of Appeal then said you must physically serve, which basically it's like the Tanzanian case where they say once an announcement has been made, that's it. Yeah. There is no case. You cannot go to court. There's no recourse. So in terms of then what do you do is, let's have this 2-week period where you have the court very quickly going through this. I think we have done it now over 3 incidents. It's difficult, but we have proved it's doable in the sense that we did it in 2013,
twice in 2017,
twice in 2017, and now in 2022. The alternative was to go for 30 days. It's a very long period. If you realize people are on pause, so to speak, that the country is on pause. As yesterday, I had discussed the traffic jam this morning. There's no traffic jam yesterday morning.
There was no traffic at all.
There you go. Yes. The reason was everybody's waiting for that decision to come down.
Yeah.
And imagine now if you had a 4-week period when that was so. I think I understand where they're coming from in terms of the time being squeezed, but I think better that than the alternative is either to extend that time or to go the normal process where you have a president sitting and then being told.
So the president-elect is sworn in, and then we continue.
But ladies and gentlemen, let me just again expose my ignorance again and ask a question.
Not at all, but go ahead.
I'm listening to all this. Huh? The legal things we'll leave to learned friends, okay? But there seems to be a silent player behind all this. And I want to ask this question. Is it possible that what we Kenyans refer to as unresolved social issues that have been there since independence. Do you think they play a part in all these emotional things we talk about, the mistrust, everything that we have here? Do they build upon this? Please.
That I think that's part of our problem. And let me just finalize something that ABDIKADIR was saying about the 14 days. The reason why I don't think we should extend those 14 days is because if you listen to this petition, there are no complex legal issues, that require a lot of preparation. The issues have been resolved at the legal sector. The facts are fairly basic. The facts are fairly basic. The facts are several questions. Is the original result from the polling station available? Is it verifiable? Those are the two questions. There could be other questions that arise pre-election. For example, if it is William Ruto who had lost, I imagine that one of the questions had been the question of the use of the public servants and their impact on the elections. But generally, those issues are resolved. So if you're a candidate, by the time the elections are announced, by then you know whether you have won or lost. By then you have also collected your evidence. So it actually should be possible to resolve that within 14 days because the alternative is imagine if it's an incumbent who has lost and you're giving it 30 days for that to be resolved. You can put, the power is powerful. When you sit in that office for 30 days and you're leaving, there's all manner of machinations that you can do. So I think it's important to resolve that and finalize it. In any case, if you have a case, you have a case. You don't need a month. Like I said, our elections are very, very basic. We just try and complicate them in the courts. Now, I said that, and I think ABDIKADIR also said earlier that our issues are not the election management process. Our issues are political. Our issues are also unresolved social issues, issues of exclusion. I was in one of the parts in this country earlier this year, and the feeling which was there about the need for the presidency to be there. These are not issues about politics. These are not issues about the law, but there's a certain sense of exclusion that people feel, and that we need to deal with. And that's why I said that part of the reason we had done that is to ensure that every part of this country, because we cannot have all the communities of Kenya represented by a president. And remember now, we talk about 42 communities. We're not 42 communities. We have intermarried. We have very many communities. How do you ensure that everybody feels that they're a part of this country? When we go to Marsabit, I don't remember whether it's you, Muhesh, who told me one time that this issue that governors are called Your Excellency and their chairs are carried by some pickup and there's a lot of razzmatazz around them, that people complain about it. But when you think about it, when will the people of Marsabit ever feel that government is in their place? That they have power. And that razzmatazz matters. We may look down on it because we are always here in Nairobi, we're always seeing authority and power. But out there in Marsabit, in Isiolo, in Mandera, in Tana River, how do people feel that government is here? The reason we devolved is for that reason. So that then we start to resolve some of these historical issues, particularly the economic ones. There are also social ones, there are historical ones, there are issues about land and historical injustices. Those issues, I think we're gradually resolving them. And that explains why, even in 2013, the level of violence post the announcement of the results was less than we were in 2017, in 2007. In 2017, the violence arose in relation to the second election. And even after that, once the election was announced, the issue just settled. This year, there's relative calm. Why? Because a lot of those issues, we are slowly resolving them. We haven't resolved them fully, but we are resolving them. And I think the project for the government that's coming in is to ensure that we continually, Kenyans are continually feeling included in Project Kenya, because that is what will make them trust institutions and trust those in authority.
And I think I absolutely agree with that. Is the elephant in the room. Trust. Our cultural norms, those are very critical, and I don't think Parliament or the courts through reforms can so that how we as a country, we as a people, incentivize. If you go and steal public resources and you are glorified back in the village, then it is not a very crazy step to go from there to stealing the election. I think those kinds of cultural norms are very important, and you cannot legislate those. I think that number two, as African countries, the expectation that we will bungle our elections and we will steal our elections, and that even in our media reporting or how we culture those issues, I think are very important. And I think education, I think conversations towards that area, NGOs, the civil society is very powerful in this country, has done a lot of good, but it has also done quite a bit of damage in terms of, so for example, the way we report about Africa and the way you report about everything being, I was reading the other day about the tour, this fellow who drives very fast in Formula One, Hamilton had in Africa, and somebody was saying the way it was reported as a tourist really, and not he was not picked by some UN body or NGO as their spokesperson to go and take pictures with hungry kids. Of course, we should deal with hunger in that sense, but you see, the image then is that everything from this continent is terrible and bad and denigrated.
And negative.
So those are the conversations we should be having, so that we turn that to the Wakanda sort of the stories, so that we don't expect everything. That is, I think, where the reforms are, as opposed to going back to Parliament and having one more bill.
And let me say something, because part of it is how we tell our stories. In this election, I visited maybe 20 counting centers and stayed for at least an hour. Some of them may be a little less. One of the things I have to say here is that Kenyans are basically very honest. Generally, actually, Kenyans are very decent people. I went to rooms. By the time they are counting the governor's elections, almost every agent is asleep.
People are tired.
People are tired, physically tired. By the way, those are,
because
when you talk
about
about reforms, this is about 4 a.m. People are tired. Don't forget they've been up since the day before the elections, because they had needed to receive whatever and get their letters. By that time, everyone is asleep. You know what I noticed is that even when an agent of a candidate was asleep, people will not allow their vote, including the agents for the other candidate. They will not allow. They'll say, no, that's for so and so. And I said then, I thought, this is the story. When we say how our elections are bad, they're stolen, we don't tell the stories of the actual place where it happened.
The successes.
And actually, the truth of the matter is a lot of these people that we vilify are actually just basic civil servants, human beings out there doing a good job. And that is the reality of our elections. The reason why when we did the recount in the, how many were they?
41.
Were there 41? You notice the elections, those people didn't know the Supreme Court was going to come and look at the elections. Why are we not telling that story and saying, maybe there are things that happen here at the top and the commissioners fight, and maybe the stakes are very high at the top. Why are we not telling the story of the 41 Kenyans who nobody was looking at? Some of those were strongholds of one candidate, and yet there was not an attempt to change the result. But instead, we have so focused on what is wrong. And that's a story we tell the West. In fact, it is the New York Times, it is the Washington Post, it is the BBC who wrote and said, Kenya's elections are very credible, but we take it to court. The BBC actually came round, because I read their story, and actually called actual presiding officers, and they looked for agents, and they collected the forms. They checked them in the portal. They said the results and they independently. Why is it that we as a media have not done that? So that we are telling our positive stories. We have very many things that go wrong with this country, but we need to redefine the way we tell our narrative.
Like everywhere else.
We need to redefine. I mean, January 6th in America. I mean, we haven't even gone there. At least we have left our courts to make a determination. Can you imagine that we actually sat down as a nation for 3 days and waited for the courts to tell us who will be our president? And we said, whoever they tell us, we will take that. There are very few places where that happens. Why don't we tell that story positively? Instead, what we do look is what is the 1% that is negative and frame it as if that is the definition of the narrative. And I think that is a role that the media needs to play. That's not to say we need to downplay our challenges. I think they must be told. But let's also, in an equal way, tell our positive stories and encourage them. I saw Eric, and this is where I finish. There was one girl, I even wrote an article about her. There was one girl at about 3 a.m. in one of the polling stations in Kutu's primary school. That girl was asleep standing. And she counted. And we kept telling her, she said no, until finally she collapsed. She slept for 15 minutes and then came back and went,
I'm fresh.
Nobody will tell her story. She's not doing that because she's on media. She's not going to come to SpiceFM. We need to tell those stories because that's the reality of Kenya. These are the ones we see here with people fighting. It's because there's money involved and procurement. Right. But down there, people are generally honest and they're generally decent human beings.
That's very true. We keep saying on this show that on the second Tuesday of August, after every 5 years, the IEBC actually conducts not one election, but 1,882 elections at the same time across
Eric,
the
can I correct you?
290 constituency elections.
No. 46,000 elections. Do you know
actually,
there's a presidential election in every polling station. And the result is announced. So we actually have 46,000 presidential elections. Presidential elections announced and credible.
That's true. Let's take a break. It's 8:30. Kenya's biggest conversation, the Situation Room on SpiceFM, on KTN Home, on YouTube and Facebook, and our website. Our guests this morning, Senior Counsel ABDIKADIR Mohamed and Advocate Kamotho Waiganjo. We are talking about elections, management of our elections, and then looking at the successes, the challenges, and going forward.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
Conversation continues with the Senior Counsel ABDIKADIR Mohamed. He is one of the lawyers that was representing the IEBC in the presidential petition. Has also been a member of parliament, member of the 10th parliament. He oversaw the birth and initial implementation of the constitution. Kamotho Waiganjo was also a commissioner with the Commission for the Implementation of the Constitution. And he is now one of the people who will be maybe challenging for the position of chairman of the first. It will be called First Ladies until you change the name.
Otherwise, we will create a wing.
First Ladies Association.
Be deliberate.
I wonder though, Kamotho, must all your members be Kenyan citizens?
Oh, no. They don't have to be Kenyan citizens. We are very liberal because we want to allow as much innovation in relationships as possible. So they don't have to be.
Freedom of association.
So in the case of Machakos also,
yes,
will be represented. So, I'm a voter in Machakos. I needed to make sure that...
No, but by the way, that issue of the first ladies, I raised an issue, but I said there's an ideological problem with the fact that it was called First Ladies because it almost assumes that the governors will always be men. That is why it's First Ladies. It never prepared for the possibility that women can be elected as governors. I have to tell you a story. I went for a prayer meeting which was called for the spouses of candidates for senators and governors. And when I got to the gate, the lady who was the she refused to. She's telling me no. Leo tunataka wa mama. Leo ni wa mama. I'm telling her no. She said no. Sio siku yenu. You'll come when we want the candidates. And we went back and forth for a while. And I thought there's a problem here. Because
Major.
if it was a man, but this was a lady. But it's a problem that we have in terms of internalizing that women can be as good leaders. Women they're not leaders because they are good leaders because they are women, but they're just as good as men can be.
Yeah.
But
if not better.
Many times I'm trying not to say that. But there are many reasons why women actually tend to do a better job in terms of long-term investment. But the reality is, as a people, we've internalized that women cannot, and we're almost violent about it.
Right, sure.
Yeah, but we need to get to the point where we recognize.
Think about it also when you talk about the two-third gender rule. Do people envision a situation where there'll be more women than men, and we are arguing that there should be more men?
We should not start electing
At
women.
least at the Supreme Court, it was women-led. Chief Justice, Deputy Chief Justice, and the Chief Registrar are all women.
Are all
Yes,
women.
they are.
And even the registrar of the Supreme Court
Because-
is still a woman. Back to that issue of, looking at our elections and how we manage them going forward. We've actually talked about this on the show many times, and maybe we can now throw it to you. We have said on the show that for us to have that eye on the IEBC make sense, independent, we've got to remove politicians from it. And by removing politicians is from even the point of how are the commissioners of the IEBC appointed. The selection panel comprises very many politicians. There are political parties represented. There's a parliamentary service commission represented. There are other political interests represented. So it's basically people who are being interviewed by politicians to come and manage an election for politicians. And assuming that we, the rest of us, the voters, don't have a say.
I have I have come round to the point that, because if you realize, we have an independent body called the Independent Electoral Commission, Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission. And we have a very elaborate process for appointing those people. So we even have them vetted by Parliament. But even the people who interview for those fellows, we have another very elaborate process. And we have even those ones, I don't know whether it still happens, but vetted by Parliament. The panel that is going to interview for
IEBC.
the fellows who are going to be asking for this job. And I think it speaks to our larger problem than the results. I have seen that happen so many times, and the result is not necessarily better. Because you have made this very elaborate one process. So basically you have a watchman, and then you have a watchman over the watchman, and you have another process that ensures that that watchman is watched over. My brother, if you go to your bank today, you take your little money and give it to a young man or a young woman at the teller.
Yep.
And they'll put it in some vault where some two other young Kenyans have keys to.
Yep.
And you don't go home and bother about whether your money is safe or not, or wake up in the middle of the night to come and check, is the bank still there? You
move on.
If it was up to me, we would even have removed that panel, because I have seen it. It really does very little. So instead of worrying,
I
We
put it to you,
insist that we
senior
must have
counsel.
it.
As long as that panel, there's a string that is coming to Parliament, which is the politicians, the 334 of them.
you
That's
tell
the
me.
problem.
Let me ask you. Tell me how many people have been vetted out of a job by our Parliament? Very few.
Very few.
I think only one or two in the last 15
That's
years.
true.
So I have come to the conclusion that we need to simplify our processes more than complicate them. I think I've grown old, but that is where I've come to. I think our problems lie elsewhere.
It's not, they're not process issues. And the initial thinking was that, what I said earlier, that because elections are a political process, you need the politicians to sort of give it, by them being the ones who appoint, it is then easier for them to give the political legitimacy to the process. But what we have realized is that it actually doesn't, and so
It spoils it.
it actually spoils it. And
We
now
are
it's going
the
to
ones
yeah.
who participate in this political process, Kamodo. It's
Yeah.
not those candidates and
It
the
is
politicians.
not.
It is we,
not.
the voters.
And we place so much. You see, one of my worries, by the way, in this case, was that the court was going to give eminence to the dispute between the commissioners and its effect on the results. Because if we had allowed for that, I guarantee you we would never have a united commission, because there would be stakes very high in keeping it disunited. I think the court has helped by saying, look, this is not about you people. It's about it's about an election. And then the other thing it has done, and why I liked the position taken by the court, is that increasingly we have so demonized the officers. You remember Chiloba. You remember Isaac Hassan. You remember the late Kivuitu. You remember now we have Chebukati. We vilify those people to the extent where no one in their right mind wants to be the chair of IBC or the CEO, because you know inevitably you'll be vilified, you'll be called treasonous. It doesn't matter what you do. The losers will find a way to bring you down, so that no one ever, so that increasingly you have fewer and fewer people of integrity and credibility wanting to reach that office. Those are the questions we need to be asking, and I'm not sure that adding another layer of approval helps us to get there. I don't think it does.
There's something you alluded to, though, when you talked about the leader then who is in position, Kamodo, to say, look, then it's an, if you ask me, it's a heavy responsibility. Because here we are saying that the process is actually quite basic. It is simple in this country. We lace it with emotion. We lace it with, in my opinion, almost psychophancy to the point whereby, we sometimes tend to lose it. But if it is then the responsibility of the leader there to say that we are going to have an all-inclusive government, we're going to have an all-inclusive country, how far do you think then that it helps to make sure that in the next round of elections and the one after that then people are going to start to see that this is a process that we're all part of. We're just taking this mantle and we're handing it over to the next person to move us along. How important is that role today?
Let's accept and to say, let's accept that one, it's a process, and that if you think from where we have come to where we are, we have made tremendous steps, and I think we need to affirm the gains that we have. I listened to President Uhuru Kenyatta last night. Obviously, he's unhappy with the result, but his position was, look, we follow the rule of law. I will hand over. We're making sure. That is how a country develops. But I think we now need to ask, maybe that resolve the elite disputes. But we need to ask the question, how do we resolve the problems at the bottom? Because if you notice this election, I am convinced myself that the reduced turnout of vote, because it wasn't that huge if you compare with other elections, unless, except...
It was.
It was, okay. It was, but there are certain areas where it almost stayed the same. But there are certain areas where there was a drop of about 20%. But there are certain areas where more or less. But that drop, whichever way you look at it, said something. It said something about his people's faith, not in the electoral process, the administrative process of elections, but in terms of the relationship between the election decision and their welfare. There's something there that is missing. People are not saying, so why do we need to vote if it doesn't translate to a change in nation for me? And I think the challenge for the people is not to resolve elite questions. I think those ones we shall resolve in some way. But to ask the question, how do we ensure that Kenyans feel included in Project Kenya, wherever they come from? And that is a huge responsibility for President William Ruto and his team to ensure that, because Kenyans will trust a process if they see that it has implications on their welfare. And that is where the investment needs to be.
Is that what those of you eminent gentlemen and ladies had in mind when you were crafting the constitution and you were devolving?
What we tried to do, and we were very many, including very many in the media, was try and see whether we can resolve the large questions or give answers to the large questions. And one of those was, and people fight over resources and people fight over representation. So to try and ensure that that goes to the ground at the lowest level, people feel included and represented and get resources, irrespective. As Kamodo said, Mo used to say, look, you elect an opposition guy, we'll tell him when he asks for resources, we'll give you development when resources are available. That was what we were hoping to, and I think to a large extent, there is quite a bit we can celebrate. There is quite a bit that they're sliding back under the administration of Uhuru Kenyatta. In many instances, in the establishment of the provincial administration, in the establishment of decisions on resources at the center, irrespective of what the constitution said. So, for example, there was supposed to have been an equalization fund, which has a sunset clause of 20 years. Many of those years are gone, but Uhuru Kenyatta refused to spend those funds. He and his administration centralized the issues of resources. Counties, funds were essentially denied to counties until it was, the last, you're given funds in the last 3 months. Really, there's very little you can do. The judiciary's resources. The judiciary in 2012 had a higher budget than the judiciary in 2022, while NIS, for example, had 3 times or 4 times the budget it had at that point, or Parliament for that matter. So there were deliberate decisions to roll back, and that is really one of the key issues for the Ruto administration. Would he follow his brother from Kanu in trying to roll back or stagnate, or will he keep to his promise as our new president to say, I will live up to the constitution, I will not interfere with the independence of institutions, and I will move the country forward. That is the homework for our good friend.
I know, gentlemen, that you want to step out now, you want to leave. Let's have closing remarks, which will be looking at the reaction of the public from this, starting with the reaction from the Council for the Petitioners. James Orengo said yesterday, and he was quoting Algo, and he said, yes, we accept, but we don't agree. Similarly, Raila Odinga also came out with the same. We accept, but we don't agree. We've seen this before. What do you think this means when those who feel that, yes, I accept because I subscribe to the system and the rule of law, but I don't agree with the decision of the court?
And I think it's legitimate, and I don't think we should browbeat people into accepting a decision. I think it's a legitimate reason. If you feel you have legitimate reasons, it's good to unpack those reasons in conversation so we understand whether your refusal to accept is a legitimate refusal. But I think that's a democratic right, and we must allow that. But I think what we are saying is that institutions matter. A country is not going to go forward if we don't allow institutions ultimately to make a decision, and I'm bound by it, even if I don't agree with it. In any case, even President William Ruto was not elected by the whole country. There are still people who will not support him, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, because he also needs to be held accountable. But I think a lot of the things we are seeing is the growth and the validity of institutions and an institutional culture, and that can only be good for this democracy.
Okay, ABDIKADIR.
I think let's give ourselves a few days or weeks to celebrate. I think it is a good thing that we have gone through an election cycle and we have come to the other side, that we have a rebirth of our institutions, especially our judiciary. So let's celebrate, and let's celebrate the good things. We deserve that at least.
Right, well said. ABDIKADIR Mohammed, Senior Counsel, is a senior lawyer in this country. He was among the lawyers representing the IEBC, but also among the people who have seen the Constitution from the point of, birth to the point of implementation, to this point where he's still active on those matters. Kamodho Waiganjo is also a senior lawyer in the country. He's an advocate of the High Court, constitutional lawyer, and the incoming, maybe, chairperson.
I like your campaign. I like your campaign. I think I should, before the elections, I'll be here again for another show.
For another one.
There you go.
Right. Asante sana, gentlemen.